How are you doing? Did you ever feel fragile? Did you ever feel like your life is not a success? And you'd know that the reason you're saying it to yourself is because you're not in good form. It's a word we use sometimes. We say to people, don't talk to me now, I'm not in good form. I find that is a kind of a liminal experience in my life. It's an experience that's on the edge all the time for me. It's like out there at the edge of how I'm living. So like if you can imagine yourself living in a kind of a laneway, and the edge of it, the liminal area, the ditch if you like, is the bit where you start saying, I have failed. I'm not in good form. It used to be a joke when we were young, people would say, how are you doing? And the answer was, I'm keeping between the ditches. And the idea or the image of driving a car between the ditches of a country road seemed to sum up perfectly that idea that you were keeping out of trouble. So that's what I call a liminal area, the edge of where it's safe to go as you're moving through life. There's this liminal place where you start to sort of judge yourself, you start to say, I'm no good. And it can come from any particular reason. It might be because you have actually failed at something. I felt it at times when I was short of money. So I would blame myself for being short of money. Or when I couldn't afford to pay a bill, and I would blame myself. Why am I no good that I can't pay me bills? Or it could happen you because something goes wrong in the house. You might be cooking the dinner, and you put, let's say, potatoes in the oven to bake them, and you forget about them until you get the smell of burning potato skin, and they're all incinerated in the oven. And your dinner is ruined, and you start to chastise yourself. So I feel like that sometimes because of mistakes I make, and then I start to tyrannize myself. Of course, I'm channeling the voice of somebody in my childhood telling me I'm no good, I'm a failure. But there's a place where this has come to me recently as a kind of a new experience, and that is when you have problems with your health. Now, over the past 4 or 5 years, I've had a few problems with health, from a coronary attack to 2 operations last year on a fistula, which was a kind of a problem in my arteries. And then this year, I've been dealing with a detached retina for a couple of months. I have what the surgeon calls a detached retina with a high watermark. And that in itself made me feel fragile. But in recent weeks, it has begun to tear, to deteriorate. And now I have to go for an operation to fix it. It's a standard operation. It only takes 1 night in hospital. And I'll be doing it this week. But it has amazed me how you begin to use your fragility physically to judge yourself. To tell yourself that you have failed. Now you may say to me that, well, you haven't failed and you're healthy and you're a young man and all the rest of it. But in some sense, what's seductive about this idea that you have failed because your health isn't perfect, the seductive thing about it is that, well, you're going to fail in this direction eventually anyway. So when something goes wrong with somebody my age, 68, it's different from when it goes wrong with somebody in their 40s. When you're in your 30s or 40s and something goes wrong with your health, you have enough life ahead of you to feel emboldened and to feel that's not going to get me down, I will overcome it. But when you're 68 and something goes wrong with the health, even something as small or slight as a detached retina, you begin to think, well, this is a sign of things to come. You know, I'm going in a certain direction here. And to be honest with you, I see no alternative for me in that except the consolation of faith. I mean, I've thought about this over the past week because, as I say, it's in the past week I've realised I'm going to have to go to hospital and we're going to have to sort it out. And I thought, how does that make me feel? Well, first of all, bad, feel I've failed, feel I'm getting old, despondent. And then I said to myself, well, that's the liminal experience. That's the ditches. That's the area you must not go there. So then I said, well, where else can I go here? Like, what can keep me out of the ditch? What can keep me away from that sort of negative thinking? The only thing that I have, the only thing that I see is faith. That if I make a kind of an active decision to express my faith, then everything becomes transformed. So I'm no longer looking at failure as failure. I'm thinking of it in the context of transformation. I could do this with Buddhism or with Jungian analysis or with Christianity. For me, it happens to be Christianity. I could do it with Judaism or with Hindu, whatever your main Islam, whatever the main tradition of faith is. And whether it's about believing in God or believing in the shunyata and emptiness of all being, no matter what the theological root is, what I find is the most amazing thing about faith, about religion, is it gives me a transformative lens through which to see failure. So I fail in my relationships, I fail in my friendships with other people, I fail almost without moral implication in my health, simply because I'm heading for 70 years of age and some things get fragile and it's like, a fender falling off an old car. And here I am with a detached retina, and yet I'm prone to feeling emotionally failed, to feeling that in some way I am failed. And then I see this through the lens of my religion, the lens that says, let's say and I'm only using the Christian stuff as an example. You can use whatever is the language of your faith, but it's the transformational power of it. So I'm looking at, let's say, belonging to Christ, the idea that we are one in Christ, and that we are transformed in Christ, and that it is no longer I who lives, but Christ who lives in me, and that this living in the light, living with Christ, is like eternity already. It's eternity now. It's a belief in heaven. It's a belief in eternal joy. As a Buddhist, I would say bliss, eternal bliss, the bliss of enlightened mind, of compassion. this bliss, belong to the bliss that is eternal, and then the linear timeline of your life begins to mean less, begins to fall away. It doesn't matter as much. And then in Christian terms, I imagine that as the arms of Mary, the Mother of God, that endless image of compassion that you see in all the icons of Russia and the Eastern Orthodox Church, all those magnificent images of this eternal Mother, embracing the child Jesus, or presenting the child Jesus, or the wise man Jesus, to us as we view the icon. And thinking that falling into that embrace is a letting go of linear time. It's a letting go of the ordinary events of my life. Falling into the arms of Mary is letting go of this life. And it's transformational for every single moment I'm living. So I'm no longer living now in the rational, real world of linear time. But I am living there, but I'm also living at a deeper level, at a level of eternity, where the embrace of the Mother goes on forever. And I was talking in the last podcast about this and how language constructs faith for us. You know, it's as if we speak the words and they become true. I was saying at Christmas in a podcast, to sing a song, sing a line of a song at Christmas, or sing a carol as you're watching it on television, and you find that to sing a note transforms your body. It's a level of communication, singing, that is fundamentally different from speaking. It brings you to a different space. And I'm thinking now that, in a way, the expression of faith is also like singing. I was talking about this in the previous podcast, about how we can construct faith, but it takes an act. You know, it's an act of belief you must have before you say the words of belief. So if you say the words, you know, I believe in God, in some sense, it takes faith in your heart before you open your mouth for the words to come out. And so the words coming out are like a way of creating the faith in you. It happens in the secular world as well, like, you know, in political terms. A person gets radicalized when they confess their faith. You know, somebody, let's say, is for a particular political party, and they join up and they pay their subscription and they feel they belong to the party. But very soon they will be asked by the party to, let's say, distribute a newspaper or collect money somewhere for the party, because they're being asked to bear witness to their faith, you know, to stand up and say, yes, I am for this party. Activists are doing it all the time. Whenever they write the slogan on a placard and they go to the place where the protest is and they stand there with the words held up aloft above their head, campaigning for some issue or another, they're finding their faith in the issue by expressing their faith in the issue. I'm coming to a point where my faith needs to be more active. Maybe in a sense the podcast is a way I have of doing that. It's a way of expressing my faith. But I'm also doing it because it keeps me between the ditches. I'm doing this because it's a therapy that keeps me in a calm and happy place. If somebody sat down with me who's a rationalist and reading books of philosophy by Steven Pinker, or, you know, some modern liberal person sits down and they say, Michael, this religion you're talking, it's unreal, you know, it's just a language of poetry. I would say, but the language of poetry is deeply true. So it may not make sense rationally to say, I live in the tender embrace of Mary, the eternal mother. It may not make great sense, logically or rationally, but it is true. It is true. And when I confess the truth of it, when I speak the truth of it, it becomes more embodied in me. And when it's embodied in me, I can drive along the road, that road of existential life, without going into the ditch. I'm protected from the ditches of negativity. I'm protected from all that negative judgment, the voices of tyranny in my head that might be saying, you're going to hospital, you're old, your life is failing, you're a failure, it will end in failure. I can avoid that because I feel loved and cherished in this metaphysical, poetic world where Mary is the eternal mother. And again, I know there are people who listen in different parts of the world. There are people I know listen in Europe and in Scandinavia and in America to this podcast. It may be that your faith is not Christian. It may be that your faith is in some way post-religious, and yet you have your own way of believing. Maybe that you have your own grammar of rituals and worship in the small domestic things you do around your house or in your garden. Your mentor deities may not be the archetypal images that come from the big religious traditions. The one you talk to and love, the one that you feel is embracing you, may be your own mother or your own grandmother who has passed away, and you feel that they're still there in heaven, but being with you. So what I'm saying is that all those people, all those ways of believing are very powerful and helpful in my experience. They keep us out of the ditches of depression. And I really feel mindful about this in January. I mean, there are so many people suffering so deeply the anxiety of failure, being tormented by voices in their own head telling them that they're a failure, almost to the point that they run them off the road. How else can you describe what is suicide? Self-harm. That you're being driven into the ditch, you're being driven off the road, and you're being destroyed by the tyrant of a negative voice in your own mind. It's like a demon. I mean, I can understand why Evagrius and all the great fathers and mothers of the desert church, they spoke so often about demons, what we would call negative energies, disturbing emotions, anger and jealousy and rage and all that stuff. But there is a really destructive demon that pulls us into the ditch, destroys our whole life, saying negative things to us. And I'm as vulnerable to that as you are. It's just part of being human. And it's certainly part of being human as you get older, because then failure is really, really facing you. If you want to be secular about life, everything passes, everything fails. Everything, every project you ever try, even every relationship. Immeasurably as I love my beloved, immeasurably as I love my children, still I know that, to be fully honest, I have failed. We all have failed. But the most insidious one sometimes can actually be the most normal, and that is old age and the fragility and the sicknesses that come with old age. I laugh now because I have 2 drawers in my desk that are full of medicines, full of them. One of them is full of medicines that I'm using at the moment, and the other is full of medicines that I didn't quite complete and didn't finish. And it makes me laugh because I remember so often going into other people's houses. Maybe my mother, maybe some old lady that I'd be, visiting, and she'd say, will you go up to the drawer there in me room and get me glasses? And you'd go up to the room and you'd be looking for the glasses in the drawer, and you'd be looking at all these boxes of tablets and bottles of pills, and you'd be saying, Jesus, the amount of stuff this one is on. And you'd be joking, you'd be saying, Mary, you could open a chemist's shop up here. And now I open my own drawer and I laugh when I see 2 drawers are stuffed. That's just part of being in your 60s, part of being fragile. It's nothing to be kind of making a fuss about, because I'm still rejoicing in the blessing of having good health. I'm not afflicted with serious injury. I'm not afflicted with serious illness. But yet, just aging and just small, minor things, having COVID, having to go to a doctor with a sore leg, a knee that's starting to show arthritis, or in my case, a detached retina that needs fixing. And a little thing like that can trigger this sense of negativity in your mind and drive you into the ditch. I really want to share this with you. When I speak my faith, when I name my faith, when I say I believe, when I choose to say I believe, it begins to grow faith in me. It grows a kind of transformative faith. And there is no rational idea can affect me like this. There's no logic can affect me. There's nothing you could tell me about, the reasonable or rational nature of life or death. There's nothing can work so powerfully, subversively as belief. The belief that the mother of Jesus, the mother of Christ, the mother of God, the mother of all being, the mother, the great mother, embraces me. And in that relationship, I'm stepping into eternity. I'm stepping outside time. I'm stepping outside all illness. And I'm living in the light of the saints. I'm living in the light of Christ. I'm living in the light of the gospel, the good news. I'm living the sense of communal joy. And I'm getting this opportunity through this podcast to share that with you. And I'm getting the opportunity to share it in this particular moment where I feel vulnerable, where I feel scared, because I'm going into hospital again to get a little operation. And that's it. Before I go, I'd like to mention the letter again. I mentioned it in the previous podcast. I'd love to create a conversation in a podcast. And one of the ways I'd like to try this is to invite people to send me a little letter, no more than 300 words. That would be no more than one page. And specifically to share with me some miracle in your life, some little bit of joy in your life, or some story or some memoir that you'd love to share. And when you send it to me, I will pick, let's say 3, and I will use them to make the podcast. So I'll make a podcast where I read the letter and then reply to the letter. And it could be your letter, could be your memory, could be your story. And that would create a kind of a conversation. Obviously, I won't use your name, and you will understand that you're writing something that could theoretically end up on the podcast, your story. But it would be a really lovely way to have a kind of a letters section in the podcast where you'd write in. And I'm giving you an email because it's better to do it to an email so that you can write privately, so that the only person that can read what you're sending is me. Because if you were to put any of this stuff up on the Patreon notice board, then other people would read it and that wouldn't be appropriate. Remember, if I use a letter that you sent me telling me some miracle in your life, some joy in your life, if I use that, I won't be referring to who sent it. That'll be well covered. And I think it could make a very special podcast where I'm hearing your voice coming through. Okay, it'll be me speaking it. But who knows, maybe we'll go further down this road and get people to send in voice letters, which would be interesting too. First time we do it, let's try it just with a simple letter to the email, which is Harding email. HARDINGEMAIL as one word. Harding email at gmail.com. Thank you for being here. And thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.